Coming up on Bridge City News, Ottawa introduces billions of dollars more to support Canadians who are unemployed. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney reacts to the Liberals' throne speech and is upset that there was no mention of support for our energy sector. And NDP leader Rachel Notley heard Lethbridge residents' concerns at a town hall meeting in Henderson Park.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Ottawa has introduced a $37 billion package that includes boosting benefits for unemployed workers to the tune of $500 a week. Now, that is equal to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is set to expire in a few days. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says the bill will provide ongoing support for Canada and Canadians as we fight the second wave of COVID-19. Conservative Deputy Leader Candace Bergen says her party cannot and will not support the Liberal throne speech because it does not do enough for Canadians, nor does it unite a divided country. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, meanwhile, says the NDP are willing to support the government if it moves quickly on a couple of measures to help people through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, Conservatives are ready for an election if that's where this goes. I think the Prime Minister had an opportunity to present a real plan to Canadians, and he didn't do that. It's very disappointing to see what he's done in the middle of a pandemic, proroguing Parliament, stopping committees, stopping parliamentarians from doing their work, all with the excuse that he was actually going to present something to Canadians to deal with this pandemic and the ongoing effects of it. And instead, it's just grand gestures and empty promises and wading into jurisdiction that he has no business wading into.
My goal is not to threaten an election. My goal is to get help to people. And so I'm saying if the Liberal government is actually interested in helping people, if that's your actual goal, I'm telling you what you could do right now, which are things that you promised to do anyways. The Liberal government promised to bring in paid sick leave. So it's not a surprise that I'm saying we fought for you to promise to do it. Do it now. So we're saying do it. And secondly, you're cutting the help that people need in a second wave. Like, don't cut the help they need. If they want our support, we will support legislation that does these two things.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney offered his response to the Liberal throne speech, and to say he was unimpressed may be a little bit of an understatement.
Yesterday's throne speech included 6,783 words. Not one of them was about the largest industry sector in the Canadian economy. Not one of them mentioned our oil and gas sector, which helped to pull Canada through the last global recession. Not one word recognizing the crisis in that sector and in energy-producing provinces like Alberta. Not one word about fairness in the Federation, about Western alienation, about creating real jobs right now as the central focus of governments across Canada.
NDP leader Rachel Notley shared her take earlier today on the throne speech and how it impacts the Alberta energy sector.
I too would have been happier to see specific reference to efforts to help Albertans and support Albertans as we come through the particularly difficult economic challenges that we're facing. I will say, though, that what we've also heard from people in the oil and gas sector is that the extension of the wage subsidy program till May is going to be a significant help to them.
Rachel Notley hosted a town hall meeting in our city on Wednesday night. She says she's staying on as the leader of the Alberta NDP. As Loris Alexander explains now, Notley says she wants to be there for Albertans and to give Kenney a run for his money in the next provincial election.
Rachel Notley stopped in Lethbridge Wednesday evening for a town hall meeting. Attendees ranged from NDP supporters to opponents, but everyone was respectful.
I couldn't actually read them. I would have liked to have read them just to see what they said, but I'm just glad they were respectful and they just had their signs and they were peaceful and quiet. And I was really impressed with the questions that were asked.
Questions ranged from program unit funding, otherwise known as PUF funding, to the timely topic of addictions and the supervised consumption site.
My son was completely nonverbal. I didn't hear him say, "I love you, Dad," until he was 4.5. That was because of PUF. PUF taught my son how to talk.
During the election, we talked about how Jason Kenney's plan was going to lead to these kinds of things, and at the time he told us, no, it wouldn't, you're fear-mongering. Well, of course, it's leading exactly to those things now. And so Albertans didn't vote for this. That's my point. And I think you folks need to hear that I think that most Albertans are with you and will be with you again. And we need to make sure that stories like your family's story are heard across the province.
I came out to hear what Rachel had to say. I really appreciated the fact that she comes and opens the floor to open discussion and comes to Lethbridge. Because Southern Alberta has often been neglected by Conservatives in the past. So I appreciate that she is here and meets people and is not afraid to face people face to face. I appreciate that.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The Alberta NDP is currently asking the UCP government to abandon centralized EMS systems in the province. A crucial meeting will be held in Edmonton on Thursday with Health Minister Tyler Shandro to discuss the future of EMS dispatch in the city.
Urge the government and to urge all UCP MLAs to do the right thing, to rise above partisanship and abandon this plan to take ambulance service out of the regional dispatch centres like the one here in Lethbridge.
We feel that we can show and know, quite honestly, that patient outcomes will suffer and that our integrated service model will no longer be as successful as it has been in the past.
My concern and the concern of all of our members of the department are that this is going to ultimately cost citizen lives. It's jeopardizing the safety of the citizens within this community.
But this system works. I don't understand why Alberta Health Services is doing what it's doing. Personally, I think every citizen in this town needs to stand up and say no.
Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, offered a COVID-19 update today. She says our province currently has 1,462 active cases of the novel coronavirus, with 58 people in hospital, including 14 in intensive care. Hinshaw also had an update as to how the virus has been impacting our schools.
As of today, AHS has confirmed that 13 schools that previously had alerts have had no transmission, and students and staff are now back in class. There are active alerts or outbreaks in 97 schools with 163 active cases in total. This represents about 4% of schools in the province. There are 32 school outbreaks, 7 of which have had likely transmission within the school in at least one case, and 4 of which have 5 or more cases and are therefore listed in the Watch category on our website.
In the South Zone, there are 40 active cases with 2 people who are currently in intensive care. There are 6 people impacted with COVID-19 in Lethbridge County. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says the federal throne speech suggests Ottawa intends to turn its back on Western Canada's energy sector at a time when it needs support now more than ever.
We are seeing nothing in this speech from the throne that addresses any of the concerns that Saskatchewan had put forward, and by extension addresses none of the concerns that the premiers from the Council of Federation table had put forward as well. So this most certainly would not be a speech from the throne that I would support.
Moe believes the Liberals' plan to pull out of sectors such as oil and gas. Ian Cameron, a spokesperson for the Office of the Minister of Natural Resources, says people who work in Canada's natural resource sectors have long driven economic growth. He says now they will drive Canada's recovery. Many in Western Canada have been frustrated by the perceived lack of respect from Ottawa. National Post columnist John Robson says when it comes to talk of Western separation, MPs should treat this sentiment as a serious issue, just as seriously as Quebec separation.
If you look at how reputable Quebec separatism is, if you find out that somebody used to be a Quebec separatist, that they wanted Quebec out of Canada and said Canada was wretched, and now they're like, well, maybe Canada's actually pretty lucrative, everybody's like, that's fine, come to the cocktail party. Here, we'll appoint you to things. We'll love to have you as a candidate. And yet Western separatism is who let this into the room. And that's part of the problem. Either Quebec separatism ought to be a career killer and you never get invited to parties, or else Western separatism should be treated as, that's an interesting perspective. Let's talk about how to make sure it's not the right answer.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Robson, who will also offer his thoughts on the Liberals' throne speech that's coming up in the second half of our show. An Alberta couple reported missing at Jasper National Park has been found dead. Matthew Kozak and Sabrina Ferrier were last seen alive on Friday, and their vehicle was found in a parking lot at the Mount Edith Cavill Road Trails. RCMP say Parks Canada staff and a helicopter discovered their bodies on Tuesday night and were recovered late yesterday. Police say it appears as though the couple were hiking when they fell from a steep bank and died from their injuries. Their deaths are under investigation and their families have been notified. After a man and his dog were killed last year in a fatal fire on the south side of Lethbridge, the city has charged 2 people with fire code violations. Several serious violations to the Alberta Fire Code include improper bedroom exit windows, lack of required smoke alarms, no carbon monoxide alarms, and a lack of proper fire separations for the furnace room. Fines for these violations can be up to $100,000 and up to 6 months in jail. Fire Marshal Heath Wright says that it's up to the owners to make sure their building is up to snuff.
Because we do not technically have the jurisdiction for residential inspections per se, it has to be complaint-based and or an emergency situation like this was. So once we go in, I'd like to emphasize that it is the owner's responsibility to understand the laws. It's not the fire department's, it's not the renters, it is the owners of these rental properties, and this is a very, very serious situation. And that's the reason we're here today.
A man wanted in connection with $3.1 million in investment fraud has turned himself into Lethbridge police. 46-year-old Josef Korech of Calgary returned to our city following a 14-day quarantine in Vancouver after a trip to the Czech Republic. Korech was wanted in a scheme that involved bilking a Lethbridge man out of $3.1 million as a down payment when the victim was looking for a loan to build a $25 million project in Ontario. His partner, 36-year-old Dustin Ritter of Okotoks, who was arrested on July 23rd, also faces fraud charges. More than 100 students from various school districts gathered in front of the Lethbridge School District headquarters today to protest the cancellation of sports. From mental health concerns to scholarship hopefuls, students say they should be trusted to play safe during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We want to make it clear, even with us wearing masks here, the majority of us wearing masks just proves the point that we're serious about this, and sports impacts us more than they'll ever know. It's something to look forward to during the day, but I know I've talked to a lot of people that said their mental health has been going downhill, and we know that we can make sports happen if we protest it hard enough.
It's a huge impact. Like, I know myself and a few other guys at LCI are just trying to play to get some scholarships. And I know a few other guys that aren't going to go to university after high school because the only reason why they would be going is to get a scholarship kind of thing.
I think because it's important to a lot of people, and especially here in Southern Alberta, we love sports. We love extracurriculars for that matter. We support our choir program, we support our band program, we support our football team, we support our basketball team. We support all that good stuff, and we want everyone to be able to have an opportunity to do what they love, and right now they don't.
The Lethbridge School Division and the Holy Spirit Catholic School Division have chosen Southland Transportation as the services provider for school bus and specialized transportation services for this school year. Officials say Southland was chosen based on their proven track record of providing safe and reliable transportation for students in the past. Southland was also the low bid on the quoted pricing over a 5-year contract. There's an option to extend the contract for 2 more subsequent 5-year terms. The Lethbridge Food Bank and Interfaith Food Bank are partnering up to bring forth the Feed Lethbridge Dinner Party event. Now, the initiative will be virtual this year. The executive director for the Lethbridge Food Bank says having a virtual event is great because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the food bank has had to shut down all of its events for the year. A spokesperson says this will allow operational costs for the fundraisers to keep going.
And we had to become creative. So this is our way of doing a dinner party that is safe and virtual and incorporates the whole city, as well as supporting local businesses. The operation side of our organizations were always funded by our fundraising events that we would have throughout the summer. And with COVID, because we had to cancel our fundraising events, we decided as both food banks to do something, a virtual event that we could still be able to fund the operational costs and be able to continue operating the same levels as we are.
More information on the Feed Lethbridge event can be found on their website. Medicine Hat Regional Hospital will be able to do simulation training thanks to a new state-of-the-art learning tool. With a $120,000 investment from the Medicine Hat District Health Foundation, a former clinical space in the hospital will be redeveloped into the simulation lab. Officials say the simulation-based training will become an essential tool in the development of frontline staff who work in a wide range of areas, including emergency, pediatrics, and the intensive care unit. The new lab will feature 3 spaces for simulation, a dedicated debriefing space, and video capture so staff can review their work. Many young people have dreams of moving to North America and making it big, as in big bucks. Now that was the goal of Sujo John as well, until he and his then pregnant wife were caught in the horror of the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001. PCN's Loris Alexander chatted with a man who completely changed his focus since that fateful time in history.
My life journey actually started in India. I grew up in India, moved to America in February of 2001, and I came to America to chase adventure and prosperity. And of all the places that I started working, that I found work, was actually the World Trade Center. I started working on the 81st floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. My wife finds work on the 71st floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
A lot of media took interest in John's story, and that became the gateway to his new calling. He spent 19 years traveling the world with his story.
As I would travel, it would expose me a lot to the needs around the world. And in one of those trips going back to India, somebody had mentioned to me that I should come and see the red light district. And for those watching me, you know this already. When you're supposed to do something, you're going to see it everywhere. You're going to hear about it. Someone's going to talk about it. You're going to turn the television. And that was going on with me in that season of my life. I was hearing about modern slavery. I was hearing of human trafficking. It was all new, a new topic to me. And so I decided to go into the red light district with a team that I'd taken with me from Dallas, Texas.
John walked into the red light district, a street called GB Road in New Delhi, where 37,000 sex workers live and work.
So when I get out of the car and I see stuff that I'd never seen before, that was my moment of God speaking to me saying, this is where I want you to be working and bring freedom to the captives.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A wind warning was in effect for our city today. We had winds up to 100 kilometers an hour. The wind warning will continue for the short term. Complete weather details are coming up. Environment Canada issued a wind warning for much of southwestern Alberta, including Lethbridge today. We had winds gusting up to 100 kilometers an hour in some regions. Tonight, more wind developing, just a few clouds in a low near 8. Now here's Jeanette Rocher with a complete look at the extended weather forecast.
Tomorrow, sunshine in Lethbridge with a southwest wind gusting to 60 kilometers at times, high 18 degrees. Saturday, windy and 16. Sunday, we'll see a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 18 degrees. Partly cloudy skies on Monday with temperatures rising to 23. Those warmer temperatures will stick around for Tuesday with a high of 24, and temperatures will climb all the way to 25 on Wednesday with a mix of sun and cloud. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 18 degrees with an average low of 3. Highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2001 at 35 degrees. Our record low was a chilly -2 in 1972. Sunrise this morning was at 7:21 a.m. and sunset is 7:25 p.m. Let's see how tomorrow is looking across the country now. Victoria will see a high of 16 and a 40% chance of showers, which should clear some of that smoky air away. Vancouver's high 17 with a 60% chance of rain. Mainly sunny skies expected in both Calgary and Edmonton tomorrow with highs of 18 and 19. A beautiful day in Regina and Saskatoon tomorrow with sunshine and a 22-degree high. Winnipeg clearing in the morning from an overnight thunderstorm with a high of 24. Expect loads of sunshine and 26 in Toronto on Friday, but a 40% chance of rain in Ottawa with a high of 24. Montreal will see partly cloudy skies with a high of 20. In Atlantic Canada, a frost advisory is in effect overnight tonight in Fredericton, becoming a mix of sun and cloud by the afternoon with a high near 19. Halifax and Charlottetown will see mainly sunshine and a high of 21 and 16 in those cities. And in St. John's, expect a mix of sun and clouds with a high of 17 degrees tomorrow.
BlackBerry says the second quarter loss was $21 million from a year ago to $23 million. The Ontario-based security software and services company says adjusted earnings amounted to 11 cents per share. Revenue was up 6% from a year ago to $259 million. BlackBerry Executive Chairman John Chen says revenue growth exceeded the company's expectations despite the ongoing challenges from COVID-19. The National Airlines Council of Canada is calling on Ottawa to present a concrete plan to help the battered travel sector right now. The government speech from the throne pledged further support for the travel and tourism industry, but the Airlines Council says help is needed now, with passenger numbers down 94% amid ongoing travel restrictions. Officials say tens of thousands of airline industry jobs have been lost since March, as costs and debt pile up, with the throne speech offering little help to stop the bleeding. There could be a new way to vote and interact with politicians. A system from a company named Veris has been invented, called the Blockchain Smart Voting System. It was made by a University of Lethbridge student, and the system has the potential to allow for voting from anywhere in the world on your phone instead of going in person to cast your vote. The inventor of the system, Peter Hurd-Wattler, says that he hopes this new system encourages young people to get on a vote, albeit in a way that they're used to through a smartphone.
I think it's the future of democracy. That's one of our goals at Veris, is to advance and protect the future of democracy. And with the coming generation, even though they have a low voter turnout, nearly every single one of them has a cell phone. So I don't see why we shouldn't be using this technology. And the key word is supplement. We're supplementing the election system. We're not replacing it, we're supplementing it. So there still will be some traditional ballots, especially for those seniors and stuff like that, but we're hoping to supplement it to allow more people to vote, increasing that accessibility and increasing that voter turnout, especially for the youth demographic.
For more information on the company Veris, you can always visit their website. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 95 points on the day to 15,912. The Dow was up 52 points to 26,815. The S&P 500 was up 9 points to 3246, and the Nasdaq was up 39 points to 10,672. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 38 cents to $40.31 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 12 cents to $2.25 U.S. Gold was up $1.95 to $18.70.03 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up 3 cents to $23.18 U.S. an ounce. Wheat is at $240 per metric ton, barley's at $237, canola's at $477, and corn is at $257 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 88 cents to $108.20. Feeder cattle were up 45 cents to $142.50, and lean hogs were down 3 cents to $69.85. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.88 U.S.
Today's market numbers are brought to you by The Meat Box, your local butcher where quality matters.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Ottawa's introduced a $37 billion package that includes boosting benefits for unemployed workers to the tune of $500 a week. That is equal to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is set to expire in a few days. There has been a lot of reaction to the federal Liberals' throne speech, including a very strong one from National Post columnist John Robson. Hear his take and why he thinks Western Canada's separation sentiment may be growing. That interview is coming up. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge's Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Mondays and Wednesdays from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. behind Nicholas Sharon Arena. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. Something new to anime fans. Every weekend, Nikayuko Japanese Garden is hosting an Anime Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Watch videos on anime creation in the pavilion and learn fun trivia about your favorite anime characters. For more information, visit nikayuko.com. Bring your lunch and enjoy beautiful live music at the same time. Come out October 2nd to the First Friday Lunch and Listen concert series featuring performances by the University of Lethbridge Conservatory of Music in Cass's Community Room beginning 12:15 p.m. and ending at 1. First Friday events are an initiative brought to you by the Heart of Our City Committee. For a full listing of upcoming events, visit firstfridaylethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
There is so much going on in our country right now with the second wave of COVID-19, the recent throne speech, and the changing of leadership in the Conservative Party, with Aaron O'Toole taking over from Andrew Scheer. To help sort out many of these big events happening in Canada today is John Robson, a columnist with the National Post, who joins me now from Ottawa. Welcome back to BCN, John.
Good to be here.
Now, John, let's start off talking about the throne speech. The Liberal Party is promising to create another 1 million jobs. They've also changed their minds about winding down the federal wage subsidy and to build a national childcare program. Now, is this a lot of just pomp and ceremony, a lot of talk, or do you think any of these things will actually happen?
Well, there's a third possibility, which is that they really intend for it to happen, but they don't know how to do it. And that one should never be ruled out. I mean, obviously, Justin Trudeau and his colleagues are not hampered by doubt about their own marvelousness when it comes both to their morals and to their proficiency in designing and executing programs. And they say they're going to create 1 million jobs. They almost certainly think they will create 1 million jobs. Though I always wonder in these situations, well, if you knew how to do that, why didn't you do it 2-3 years ago? I mean, hey, great, you can create jobs. There are unemployed people. Let's do this. But, you know, they have a computer program that says if you do this, you'll have 1 million jobs. And then they'll do it. And then they'll run it through the computer program a second time and say, well, the computer says we created 1 million jobs. And you'll say, well, you actually just ran the same simulation twice. They're like, what? But they do think they can do this stuff. You know, they think they can give us all childcare. They think they can conjure money out of thin air. So they really do mean it. And they don't spend a lot of time looking back at what they said in the past they were going to do and asking, gee, how did that turn out? Because that, I mean, that might prove discouraging, but they don't discourage easily. So I'm sure they intend to do it. And if they think they can spend indefinitely, you know, oh, well, low interest rates is not a problem. So we can keep handing out wage subsidies and so on. We can spend money on anything. You know, during the summer, the Prime Minister was announcing $1 billion in spending a day or so, it felt. And there was never any sense that, okay, maybe we'll take a day off here because that's a lot of money. It was always, what else can we do for nothing but numbers in a ledger? I mean, what's a number in a ledger? That costs us nothing. Whereas you get all this good stuff and then you vote for us. So, yeah, I imagine they really will try and do a lot of this. But I don't think we're going to see a lot of results, but not because they didn't mean it.
The throne speech did nothing to address climate change, economic inequality, and systemic racism due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think this maybe hurt the Liberals and Justin Trudeau?
I don't think so. You see, one of the problems is that all these guys really know how to do now, guys and gals, is give a campaign speech. Everything they give is fundamentally the stump speech. And so right now it's like, oh, polls say people are worried about COVID, so you talk about COVID. It doesn't have any real impact on your agenda. The idea that the throne speech would be a sober way of alerting legislators to what the executive was going to be sending down the pipe so that they could give a reasonable, informed response to it is long gone. I'm actually having an interesting debate with people on Twitter over, there's a requirement in our Constitution that says the Commons cannot appropriate money for any purpose that is not first outlined by a message from the Governor General in that session. And some people are saying that just means every bill has to have a little note from the Governor General saying, please spend this money, which is so that private members' bills can't spend money. But I say the throne speech needs to contain fairly specific undertakings that the MPs can then think about. But it's all just sort of feel-good stuff. And if Trudeau wakes up tomorrow morning and decides he needs a Green New Deal, he'll put one through Parliament without regard for it having been in the throne speech. So it's really not very useful. It doesn't tell us what the government really thinks it should do. It just tells us what the government thinks we think it should do. And that makes it, there's a lot of sound and fury, but signifying far too little. I've seen British throne speeches from decades ago that were very dry and sober. The government will introduce a bill to regulate shipping, and it will do the following things. You know, the government will, and quite dry and detailed, and then legislators could check this off as they went through the year, as opposed to, we will save you all from purple dragons, whatever they may be.
Now, the Conservatives were not impressed and were not willing to support the throne speech, John. Deputy Party Leader Candice Bergen says she wanted to see more help for Canadians who are falling through the cracks of the pandemic aid programs, including single moms, oil workers, and fishermen.
Yeah, so the Liberals say they're going to spend, you know, billions of dollars on every person who they can find, and the Conservatives say, hey, here are some people you missed, spend more, which it makes you wonder why you have a Conservative Party. Why not just have another Liberal Party? Because it's astonishing the extent to which the Conservatives have bought into the government can do everything, and it has a magic money tree view. which again, I guess pollsters tell them this poll as well. Don't go telling people there's no free lunch. They won't like you. And there's nothing to be gained in this world or the next by telling people the truth and hoping that they're willing to meet you halfway. And again, you look at the press releases that come from any of the opposition parties, and you think to yourself, they wrote that ahead of time, didn't they? And then they just tweaked it a little and put it out. You don't have to ask yourself, what Conservatives weren't going to say, hey, that was a great throne speech, nor are they going to say we have too much government. So they're going to complain that the handouts weren't tailored in quite the right way to quite the right people, including our constituents, who should have even more money from the public treasury. So that's politics for you these days.
Now let's talk about Canada's debt, which is around $1 trillion. You talk about that money tree here. We have a deficit of over $343 billion. With all of the spending going on, will we ever get back to black? Will we ever get the spending under control, John?
It doesn't seem very likely. I mean, as you may remember, last time we elected the Conservatives, they went and ran a $50 billion deficit and told us that deficits stimulate the economy, which they'd spent decades telling us they didn't. And then suddenly it was like, hey, we could buy votes with this. And then they lost the election. So I guess they weren't good at it. And they were gradually staggering back toward balance, but not in such a way that the structural problems, in my view, were addressed. That the government is in a bidding war, the political parties are, over the available votes in swing ridings. And the way you get votes is that you improve the sweet deal for voters, and you do that by loading it onto future generations. And now, of course, I mean, governments have had their foot to the floor on monetary policy since 2008, with, it seems to me, rather indifferent results. But they're hooked on low interest rates. They can't let them get back to a kind of market clearing rate. And this, of course, is good for borrowers and bad for lenders, which means, and then you wonder why Canada's savings rate is low. So, I mean, do you see the Trudeau Liberals suddenly deciding to cut $100 billion in spending? Do you see the provincial governments saying, you know what, the healthcare system is really unsustainable, we need to reform it? Healthcare is taking, 40+% of every provincial budget program spending, and it's just getting worse as the population ages. And as now, of course, the waiting lists have sort of doubled with the pandemic, and they were getting longer anyway. And nobody's willing to say we have too much government and therefore we should have less. That's the thing that nobody says, except me, and I'm regarded as kind of this irritating crank, but that's fine by me. But no, I mean, until you get a party that says we have too much government, and if you have too much government, you should have less government, then it's just inconceivable that we will get off this treadmill of spending ever more money in an attempt to attract votes from other parties that are also hurling the stuff out the window as fast as they can grab it with both hands and fling.
Do you think we'll see a federal election anytime soon here in Canada?
I rather doubt it. We obviously, the Liberals could lose the confidence of their coalition partners, but I don't think anybody really wants an election, especially during the pandemic. Nobody wants to be blamed for causing an election. And frankly, what is the NDP going to get more spending after an election than before? Is the Bloc going to have better leverage? Are the Conservatives ready to fight? Are the Liberals confident that they would win? It seems to me that none of them really want one. And we'll also have to watch what happens in BC, where John Horgan, they've got fixed election dates, and he signed a written pledge not to go early, and then he went early and said, well, haha, I feel like it. If he gets pummeled by voters for this, that will make it even less likely that we'll have one. But again, what's the point? How do we end up different? Never mind better. How are things really different if we have an election? I don't see the Liberals winning a smashing majority. I don't see the NDP winning more seats than they've got. I don't see the Tories winning. So it's just a lot of fuss, and they all go back to doing what they're already doing without having to try and stump the country when you're not allowed to shake a voter's hand because they'll think you tried to give them bubonic plague.
Erin O'Toole has taken over the reins of the Conservative Party of Canada. Many argue that O'Toole is a red Tory, John, and that'll leave the Social Conservatives on the outside looking in. What are your thoughts?
It's certainly revealing. I mean, he ran against Peter MacKay saying, I'm true blue, Peter MacKay's a red Tory, and Peter MacKay is a red Tory, so he lost. And then O'Toole immediately comes out and says, oh, well, I'm into the progressive sexual agenda, and I really like unions, and I want managed trade, and I'm going to meet the Paris Accord. We went through a leadership race for that. It's like you're Justin Trudeau without the charisma, and we don't even like Justin Trudeau with the charisma. So why? What's it for? What does Erin O'Toole stand for that is strikingly conservative? As I asked in a column recently, what is government currently doing that he would have it stop doing? Never mind, throw the social conservatives under the bus. Everybody hates them. Nobody knows those people. Forget about strengthening defense because we can't find the money. Let's just cling to the libertarian, the last tussock of dry ground for conservatives. Where would you cut government? And if you can't even answer that, it seems to me that there's nothing good is suddenly going to happen. He's not suddenly in 3 months going to go, hey, guess what? I'm really right wing. What you see is what you get. He's getting advice from pollsters, and he wants to be liked by progressives. And to be liked by progressives, you have to insist that you too think conservatives are yucky people. What's he going to do for the unborn? Absolutely nothing. Not a thing.
Now, O'Toole launched his leadership campaign in Calgary. He seemed to have the support at that time from Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. John, do you think O'Toole will be a good advocate on behalf of the Western Canadian provinces?
I think he'll do an adequate job, probably rhetorically. But again, he's all in on global warming, right? He's into meeting the Paris targets, so that means you're into a carbon tax or something else. You can't destroy the fossil fuel industry and save it at the same time. You'll just wind up, bouncing the corpse or something. You've got to take on this climate change stuff on the basis of the science, or else you can't fight it on the policy. And O'Toole has this cunning plan where he will sidle left and somehow gain power by sneaking up on the Liberals, who he thinks are politically clueless, which is the last thing they are. And by which point he'll have compromised his agenda so much that what good could it possibly do? I mean, the Liberals already bought the pipeline. What more can you say at this point? It's just so odd to me that so many people go into politics as conservatives in order to make sure that no conservative option is ever actually presented to voters. And it looks as though Erin O'Toole is another one of that crowd. Your tie's the wrong color, sir. It ought to be red. And that's just about all there is to it.
I guess maybe if O'Toole does become Prime Minister one day, he can always say, Bill C-48, C-69, they're gone. Now, John, will O'Toole taking over lead maybe to more support for Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada? And what about Separatist Party, Maverick Party, led by interim leader Jay Hill?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I obviously like Maxime Bernier's party for its libertarianism and its willingness to challenge taboos. I sometimes wonder if the people on the Twitter feed aren't 23 years old, which isn't the best idea you could possibly have. But it seems to me, one thing for Maxime Bernier, he couldn't possibly have less support. He's far too sensible and honest, it seems, to attract broad support, but he couldn't have less, so I think he'll have more. I don't know that Western separatism is yet a viable political force, but I do think, remember with Mulrooney and the C-18 maintenance decision, which looked like such a small thing at the time and turned out to be huge. I think it's like these wildfires that we're having. There's a big fuel load out there, and a couple of things could ignite it. So I don't think that the people in central Canada, by and large, understand that, especially not, the so-called Laurentian elite. They don't grasp the degree to which under-the-surface Westerners feel disrespected in ways that are potentially quite dangerous. So I do worry that Western separatism might take flight instead of libertarianism. And I'm not against, I understand the West grievances, and I think they need to be met. I'm a proud Canadian, but I'm not, the word Canada doesn't justify anything. There are things that if Canada does it, Alberta and Saskatchewan would be right to go it alone. It's important to realize that that is true, and then make sure you don't go anywhere near that kind of thing. And if you look at how reputable Quebec separatism is, if you find out that somebody used to be a Quebec separatist, that they wanted Quebec out of Canada and said Canada was wretched, and now they're like, well, maybe Canada's actually pretty lucrative, everybody's like, that's fine, come to the cocktail party. Here, we'll appoint you to things. We'll love to have you as a candidate. And yet Western separatism is who let this leper into the room. And that's part of the problem. Either Quebec separatism ought to be a career killer and you never get invited to parties, or else Western separatism should be treated as, that's an interesting perspective. Let's talk about how to make sure it's not the right answer. And we really, we've done a couple of conferences out in Calgary and out in Alberta with the Economic Education Association of Alberta, where we've said, okay, well, what are the benefits? What are the costs? And the whole way we said, look, we're trying to understand rationally what the options are. What's on one side of the scale, what's on the other. It's not a magic bullet, but it's also not unthinkable. And the more people treat it as though it's just ridiculous, the more thinkable it's going to become. So if you love Canada, don't do it.
You know, John, I often chat with one of our regular contributors, American journalist Lisa Daftari, about the upcoming U.S. federal election in November. Let's get your thoughts as a Canadian journalist. Would Joe Biden and the Democrats winning be a good thing for Canada, or is it better if Donald Trump and the Republicans get reelected?
Wow. Which side of my head would I like to be punched on hard? You know, I'm a real unfan of Donald Trump. Mind you, I also thought he couldn't win in 2016. I didn't think he'd get the nomination. So, you know, as a prognosticator, I'm a little bit suspicious. But I think that Joe Biden, I honestly believe that his health is not up to the job. I think you need to be asking yourself about Kamala Harris as president if the Democrats win, because I don't believe Biden, I literally don't think he's capable of doing the job. The Democrats are likely to win. The electoral map favors them and has for years, but the campaign's not going as well as it should. The ghost of Hillary Clinton's defeat hovers over them. And I got a very interesting interactive news story from NBC where they'd shown you a bunch of key demographics, and this is how they split in partisan terms. This is how their voting turnout is. And you could slide them and see what it would take for Trump to win. And it takes a reasonably small change in Hispanic and Black American votes in the direction of the Republicans to make a Trump victory a real possibility. And one of the problems the Democrats have, and they've had this since the Nixon years, is their apparent sympathy for urban unrest is profoundly upsetting, including to people who live in poor neighborhoods. They may in principle think the Republicans aren't on their side, but boy, violence in the streets really scares people, and rightly so. And the Democrats could certainly lose this election. But if Biden wins, well, you know, he's kind of a standard New Deal liberal. You know, you always want to say in partisan terms, this is the election of our lifetime, and he'd be the worst than the worst thing ever. People said that about Barack Obama. I thought he wasn't a very good president, but it wasn't. The world didn't end. Life went on. I think Biden would probably be kind of a, you know, middle of the pack, left-leaning Democratic president, which I don't want, but I don't fear it. I fear a climate in which people like Donald Trump can get the nomination, and then the Democrats could nominate someone so much worse they lost the election. Like, if you were given the task of losing the 2016 election to Donald Trump, you wouldn't know where to start. The polarization, the lack of sympathy, the gutter rhetoric, the explosions of rage and obscenity on Twitter, all of this stuff is coming from both sides. That's what scares me a lot more than the thought that we might get. We've somehow survived Donald Trump presidency. We could probably survive another term for Trump. We could survive a Biden presidency. But why must this be the choice? That's the question I wish voters would ask themselves. We can do better. Both parties can do better, and both parties should do better.
National Post columnist John Robson, thanks for joining me today from Ottawa.
Always a pleasure.
As the dust settles and economies slowly reopen after months of COVID-19 restrictions, those in developing nations are still dealing with rising numbers of coronavirus cases. Compassion Canada is a charitable organization committed to helping children and their families in these developing nations to prosper and live in health during the crisis. Joining me now to talk about it is the President and CEO of Compassion Canada, Allison Alley. Welcome back to BCN, Allison.
Thank you, Hal. It's great to be with you again.
Allison, how has COVID-19 really impacted your group, Compassion Canada?
Yeah, well, Compassion works in 37 countries in low, middle, and high-income economies and countries. And this pandemic has impacted every single location we work, right? There's a reason why we call it a virus that knows no borders. And so not dissimilar to in Canada, you know, government quarantines were put in place in every area we work. Our offices were closed and staff were sent to work from home overnight around the globe. And so our focus since then as global leaders has been how can we come together and adapt and respond to not just the changing needs of kids living in poverty, but the critical and increasing needs that they're facing.
So what hurdles specifically have children and families living in poverty really come up against?
Yeah, so for kids and families living in extreme poverty, everything about COVID-19 is magnified for them. The risk, the fear, the uncertainty, the life and death reality that they face. Because many of the families that we serve have no safety net, right? So their survival is on the line when something like a health or an economic crisis hits. Many of them are day laborers, which means if they're unable to go out and earn a daily wage, they're unable to put food on their table at night. But beyond that, experts are also talking about the cascading effects of this pandemic. We anticipate hunger may double by the end of the year. We see the pandemic triggering, an increase in preventable diseases like malaria and measles. And really, it could undo more than 10 years of progress towards combating poverty. And so this is a crisis for the world's poor, unlike anything we've ever seen.
Allison, have staff members been able to visit the homes of the sponsored kids? And if so, what measures have they taken to really prevent the spread of COVID-19?
Yeah, our program has always been locally led and contextualized with a focus on knowing, loving, and protecting kids based on their unique needs and the unique challenges that they face. But in this season, as you can imagine, our staff and our partners are having to be more creative and adaptive than they've ever had to be in how they go about doing that. But they're getting in front of them. They're visiting their homes when they're able to do that. They're delivering food and hygiene kits. They're making masks and hand sanitizer, educating communities through flyers and digital campaigns. And of course, a critical part of our work right now is trauma counseling and child protection. Because when there's crisis in the home and when there's instability, kids are often the ones that are the most impacted as violence in the home increases. So we're working on that as well, of course.
Can you comment on the strain this crisis has had specifically on medical services in some of these developing countries?
Yeah, the countries that we work in, Hal, already have fragile and strained medical and health systems. So as you can imagine, when you add COVID-19 to the picture, it becomes even more critical because they have to choose where to allocate their already limited resources. It's not dissimilar to what we saw during the Ebola epidemic when West African countries had no choice but to really devote their limited resources to battling the deadly disease. But it meant that other important life-saving interventions like basic vaccinations or maternal health were neglected. And that basically led to a rise in maternal deaths. And so it is dire. It's staggering how under-resourced they are and the implication of that. But actually, it's interesting timing because I was just on a call with our National Director of Compassion Ecuador right before talking to you, Hal. And he had talked about how, in addition to all the ways that they're helping kids and families access medical services or give them access to private hospital care if needed, they've also created a new telehealth program. And so they've created this phone number similar to telehealth that we would have that these kids and families can call to access a network of doctors and practitioners and counselors. But what I love about this is that some of those medical professionals are former sponsored children who have gone through our leadership development program and are now doctors and nurses. So incredible work's being done.
Wow, great success stories. Nice to hear that. Now, are cases of the virus, Allison, increasing or decreasing in some of these developing nations?
Yeah, the spread and the impact of the virus is certainly different everywhere that we work, but it is definitely continuing to increase. Developing countries now account for 3/4 of the new daily cases that are being reported. But of course, we know that with the limitations of testing in those contexts, the numbers are much, much higher. But it is increasing the fastest in Latin America right now, faster than anywhere in the world. We happen to work in Brazil, which, if you're following the news, that's now become one of the new epicenters of the pandemic, right? And they're anticipating that its numbers are going to surpass the United States in the coming weeks. For us, we've got our eye on the fact that it's spreading into the Northeast region, which is where most of the country's impoverished regions are. And it's also moving into indigenous territories in the Amazon, which, as you can imagine, we were just talking about limited medical care. That would be most certainly the case there.
So how about education? Are people able to get out to some of these regions, the far remote regions of the Amazon or maybe in Latin America, and explaining that, social distancing, physical distancing is important, not to spread the virus, the masks and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge. It's education is always a struggle. First of all, in getting to the remote regions, as you said, but even those who have access to education, formal education, are no longer able to go. So for us as an organization, we have been working as it relates to just healthcare and prevention education to provide that in creative ways. We have different social media and digital campaigns. We've been putting flyers up in communities, but we also have been creating videos and FaceTime calls with students who have been preparing, for example, for end of year exams or for different schoolwork. We've ensured to get in front of them and support them in their more formal academic and educational needs as well.
Now, Compassion Canada also has this thing called We Rise as One initiative, helping out in some of these developing countries. Allison, let's chit-chat a bit about that.
Yeah, well, ultimately, we feel like a global crisis warrants a global response. And so our worldwide Compassion family has come together for the first time to launch a global fundraising campaign to help the most critically vulnerable children and families. And so we're inviting exactly that, folks around the globe to join us and to rise as one, to lift up their voice, to give their influence, but also to respond practically to those who so desperately need it. So specifically how we're raising funds to give at-risk children, families, and communities the health and stability they need through hygiene, food, and shelter.
What is in some of these kits actually that has the food and hygiene?
Yeah, so for hygiene, it would include really practical things like hand sanitizer, soap, vitamins, supplements, cleaning supplies, protective masks, and of course, as we talked about education, the tools on how to use it and why it's important. But we also have these food kits that we're handing out. And it's probably worth noting that food security is becoming one of the most prominent and severe risks, not just for the people that we serve, but for those experiencing COVID-19 in these low-income economies. Because as I said, they're unable to make income, which makes them unable to provide food, but also how we're seeing already that global supply chains are starting to break down. When there's food shortages and shortage of supply, we know that the price goes up, which is just magnifying and intensifying the need for these families. So for us, we are providing practical kits that include things like rice and eggs and milk and corn and other non-perishables. While also a large part of our work is on helping pregnant and new moms. And so we ensure that these pregnant and nursing mothers have the nutrition and supplements that they need as well.
You know, they sound fairly helpful. Will Compassion continue to give out the kits after the coronavirus crisis?
Yeah, I mean, this is a short-term relief that we're doing as part of our long-term sustainable development efforts. And so we always focus on the holistic well-being of the kids that we serve. We work to grow them spiritually, socially, physically, and cognitively. And therefore, things like hygiene and food and stability are a regular part of what we do. But as we move forward and enter new phases of development, the way that we offer them and how we do it will continue to change based on their unique needs and the opportunities around them.
You know, Allison, even before we've ever heard of COVID-19, your organization was involved in something called Holistic Child Development Work. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so that recognizes that we as human beings are whole beings, and we can so often think of poverty as just an economic challenge that requires a financial response. But we, particularly as a faith-based organization, recognize that not dissimilar to how Jesus grew, it says in Luke 2:52 that Jesus grew in wisdom, in stature, in favor with God, and in favor with man. We follow that model and develop kids spiritually, socially, physically, and cognitively so they can really flourish into their full God-given potential and contribute wholly to the community around them.
Let's talk more specifically now about how Compassion Canada works. On your website, you say that we shouldn't respond to poverty by just handing out food and Bibles, correct?
Yeah, we really think that it's important, first of all, to have a long-term model that prioritizes and highlights the local, national people. And so I think the first thing to understand, and I will answer your question more directly, but the first thing is we work only with national offices and partner with local churches who have been there before Compassion, will be there after Compassion, and really know the names and the faces and the needs of their communities. And because of that, they understand that poverty is complex, development is complex, And not dissimilar to how we think about our needs, Hal, the needs of our kids, the needs of our society. They work to address all of those needs as well and say, yeah, there's a physical component, but there's also social, interpersonal, there's family needs, there's community needs. And so they work to grow kids holistically in that context in appropriate ways.
Now we pray that God would bless and support various nonprofits, including your own, which honor him and bring him glory. How can our viewers bless you? What are you specifically needing help with? Is it maybe volunteers?
Yeah, well, first of all, we appreciate your prayer. There's so much need, as you can imagine, and we are facing an incredible amount of cases in our beneficiaries and their families, and of course are starting to encounter deaths of the kids that we serve or of our frontline partners and volunteers. So pray for them and the impact on their family. But specifically, absolutely, we're always looking for volunteers. And actually, we launched this We Rise as One campaign with our volunteers, which are really close family members of our organization, just last night. And so you can check out different volunteer opportunities on our website, which is COMPASSION.CA.
Yes, for more information, definitely check out that website and continue with the great work around the world. Great job, Allison.
Thank you so much, Hal. Appreciate your time.
Allison Alley, President and CEO of Compassion Canada. On behalf of all of us here at PCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.